Everyone. So let's just try and I hope today really finish this subtopic off and clarify things. Basically, I argued in good company. The Magen Mishnah argued that we have here a nuanced difference in language between Rashi and the Rambam that reflects a very different way of thinking about things. According to Rashi, the delet of the bias is not a kli, and that's synonymous with Einum and Omachon. If it's Einum and Omachon, then it's not a kli. And that's what the words Einum and Omachon mean, according to Rashi. According to the Rambam, it's a kli, but it's a kli that's Einum and Omachon. That's the quite clear in the language. The Chazon Ish, as we said, disagreed, but the Halacha, the Magen Mishnah, and seemingly a consensus is that there's a genuine difference between these two explanations. I think Adam's question about Kol HaKelim Netolim stimulated me to realize that really this is throwing us back to the language of the Mishnah. The Mishnah says Kol HaKelim Netolim, which if you have that case and you translate it literally means anything which is a keli is not Muktza. By definition, if it's Einum and Omachon, if it's Muktza, it's not a kli, and that indeed seems to be the view of Rashi. Tosfos, the Shulchan Aruch, the Rambam, all have a different case of Kol HaKelim HaNitolin. In that version, it's a very different logic. It's any keli which is nitol, but there are kelim which are not nitolin. So the two discussions really align, and that's I think that's where we got up to at the end of the day between that topic. Now, what I'd like to try and understand really is what the nafkamina lemaisa in practice is between these two perspectives, and more profoundly, why, according to the Rambam, if it is a kli, is it not muchan? All the Rambam says is delatos abayis afal bishin kelim lo hachanu l'taltel. The delatot of the bias, even though they're not muchan, even though they're a keli, they're not muchan at all. And he doesn't really explain why. So the Biur Halacha adds in a few words of explanation, and he says lefish lo huchanu l'taltel, and then he adds in rotzanom Hashem ondim rak l'malachton. So he says that they're not muchan l'taltel, and therefore that means to say that they're only muchan for their malacha. In other words, the chiddush of the Rambam is Shem Omzim Rak Malachon, they're only omeid, they're only destined, set aside, and dedicated for their malacha. In other words, normally the whole londus of a kli, why it's not Muktza, is because a kli isn't, even though a kli has a specific function, if it's a fork, its default function is used for eating with, nonetheless, it's muchan. Since it's a kli, i.e. my servant, my utensil, it's muchan for any hishtamshus that comes along. And therefore, even a kli which has a degree of mukta to it, like a hammer, which is made for hammering nails in, and therefore it's a kli shemalachta issa, nonetheless it's a kli. And a kli is my servant, it's my utensil, and therefore it's muchan for any other use that happens to crop up. And therefore, even a kli that's shemalachta issa is mutter. Can be used for a mutzah hishtamshus. So normally speaking, the essence of a kli is that it's muchan for anything. It's prepared for anything, and therefore it's not mukta. The Rambam is arguing that you have rare kelim which are not muchan for anything other than their melacha. Why is this deles of the house or a pit, the cover of a pit, not muchan for any other hishtamshus? Because it's not muchan for tiltul. And therefore, it's mechuba, it's detached to its place, and therefore it only has one functionality, which is opening and closing as a door. And therefore, it's a kli, but it's not muchan. So, in a sense, there's a sort of a double machlokas here between Rashi and the Rambam. Rashi says that the hishtamshus of doorness, of opening and closing a door, doesn't make it a keli, and it isn't a keli. Why not? Because a hishtamshus that isn't omeid for all uses, or to put it differently, a hishtamshus that allows you to use something but not move something means it's not a keli. And according to the Rambam, a keli which has a hishtamshus, even though it's fixed in place, is a keli, it's just not muchan for other ishtamshus because you can't be metaltal it. So to put it differently, Rashi seems to say that the shem keli is dependent on tiltal, and the Rambam says the same shem keli is dependent on ishtamshus, and then we have to judge whether it's muchan or not. That seems to be the machlokas. And to put that differently, according to the Rambam, in essence, it's not Muktza with respect to its primary hishtamshus of being a door, because with respect to that, it is a keli and it's used for their hishtamshus. The problem is it's not omed for any other hishtamshus. So according to the Rambam, you have a remarkable paradox. You have something with a shem keli that's omed for hishtamshus, and it can be used for that hishtamshus, but it's Muktza with respect to everything else because it's not muchan for any other hishtamshus. It's not paradox, there's nothing contradictory in it. This is an interesting concept. That it's a keli, it's muchan for hishtamshus, it can be used for its hishtamshus, and yet it's not muchan for any other hishtamshus. That's what the Rambam is saying in this, according to these few brief words of Hezbollah, an explanation of the Halacha. Sorry.
How is this different to the next Mishnah in the Paris? You talk about the Masechet Shabbat. You've got certain things which are Muktza, Machno, Chesron, Kiss, because they have a specific use.
Yeah.
So this big sword was only used for this particular purpose, and it's Muktza for anything else. So what this seems, how's Rashi going to deal with that scenario? Okay,
so that's a genuinely superb point. And in the second part of the Shiur, I was going to come on to this, and I will touch on it soon, that once we hear this logic, we can now begin thinking about other scenarios. And one very good scenario of that is our other single-use kelim that by definition are specifically set aside and exclude any other hishtamshus. Now, normally, a keli by definition is made for its primary purpose, like a fork or a knife or spoon or whatever, but it's also made for any other use. If I need to use the spoon to bang something into place, I'll do it, because why not? It certainly has a multiplicity of potential uses, and it's made for any use. There are kelim which are single-purpose kelim, where their primary use excludes any other use, and that's also known as Muktza Machmas Chesaron Kiss. So the logic of Muktza Machmas Chesaron Kiss is that it may have one particular use, but that use is so sensitive or so specialized that you would never ever use this key for anything else. And indeed, the post can begin making comparisons between these two sugyas. So your ha'ara is spot on. And I don't remember if I printed it, the Magen Avraham. Did I print the Magen Avraham here? I printed the Magen Avraham in very brief. No, I didn't. It's a different Magen Avraham printed. I didn't print the main Magen Avraham. I'll show it to you afterwards, Anthony, if you're interested. I'll put them out in the Maran Kemis in the WhatsApp group. But all I'm saying for now is that we found a scenario, according to the Rambam, of something which has a single-purpose use, opening and closing as a door. It is a keli because its single-purpose use is a hishtamshus, and nonetheless it's excluded from any other use by dint of being hinged and mechuba lekaka. And we could now begin speculating about other single-purpose use kelim, where their primary use excludes them being used for anything else. An example of that is Muktza Machmas Chesaron Kiss. I'll give you an example of Muktza Machmas Chesaron Kiss. So a shechita knife or an Ismail Shulmila. So these are very, very delicate instruments. They're the high tech of their age. They're very, very sensitive with a very delicate and sharp blade, and therefore you wouldn't use them for anything else because their primary use contradicts them being omed for any other use, and therefore their single-purpose use, because they're chesaron kiss, they're expensive items. If I use it for anything else, I risk damaging it. You don't leave it lying around because it risks getting damage. So this is the concept of Muktza Machmas Chesaron Kiss, and one way of understanding it is that it's a single-purpose use, and therefore it's a keli, which is not muchan for anything else. So that's a very apt comparison, and we'll come to that in a few moments.
So could you not argue about the doors of the cupboard or whatever that we've been talking about? I know you could use them sort of for something else, but they're not set aside to be used for something else originally, are they? They're just the doors of a cupboard. So
I think it's again a very, very fine point. I think when Rashi says that it's not Muktza because it's Muchan Agav Aviem, Rashi's point is that it's true that the cupboard door would only be used for the cupboard, but the cupboard itself the box is a portable keli, and therefore could be omed for anything, and therefore the door could be omed for anything. So the door is mucham agav avim. I think that's the point that Rashi is bringing out. So you're right. You could argue with the cupboard doors. Surely the cupboard door is attached to the cupboard and would therefore only ever be used as a cupboard door and nothing else. And the answer is that's true, but there's nothing specific in the use of the cupboard. The cupboard is made for anything that you wish to use it for. You could move the box around and use it to put things on and place things on and hang things from it, and you do all sorts of uses for it. You move boxes around, and therefore indeed the cupboard door also would move around. If you had a big wardrobe that would be fixed in place because it's too big to move, then it would be mechaber and that would be fixed in its place, and that would cease to be a davar netaltel. It would cease to be something that's as total.
Can I maybe answer Adam's question, Rashi? I might be wrong, but I think Rashi is saying doors aren't kelim at all, full stop, ever. Doors are part of whatever they are a door of. So if the thing that they're a part of is a keli, then the door by definition is a keli. If it's part of a building which isn't a keli, the door is not a keli. And therefore, only in terms of when it is, so it's the tozal alagav vihem, that's the sort of important bit. It's the av that defines the door, and a door that's just stuck in the middle of the wilderness with no building whatsoever has no purpose whatsoever. It doesn't do anything. The door serves the thing it's a door to. Therefore, when it's part of a house, it's never a kli, and so you don't have to worry about it being a kli. So Rambam is a kli, and that's why he can compare it to Muktza mathematics from case. But Rashi doesn't even have to worry about it because he says the door is part of the house. The house isn't a kli, and therefore the door was never a kli to begin with, full stop. And it's not a kasher Rashi, therefore.
I need to think it through. Your answer may be better than my answer. You may be right. Just now to Max, I was saying this is what Rashi means by agav avien, and your ha'ara is pointing out to me that maybe I went a little too far in Rashi when I said that according to Rashi, because it's not portable, it's not a kli. Maybe Rashi is saying over here it's not a kli because a door is always part of the larger object, and therefore the door it's more like I was saying last time. Actually, I may have inadvertently slipped into overselling the point in Rashi. I need to think that a little bit through. So just to summarize, so we don't come out confused from this. In the Rambam, the door is in a sense the Rambam is simpler. You're pointing out, despite the originality of the Rambam. The Rambam says, just to summarize, so we can move on and be clear about what is clear and what isn't clear. The Rambam says that a door is a kli. However, it's allocated for a single purpose. This is how the Halacha explains the Rambam anyway, because it's immovable, and therefore it has one function and one function only, which is to be opened and close the door, and therefore not mucham for any other tashmishim, and it's an unusual beast. It's a kli that's not mucham for anything else. And as Adam successfully pointed out, there may be other examples of that, and Chosronkis is a very nice example of that. Fine, very simple. According to Rashi, it's not a kli, either because Rashi holds that a single-purpose, immovable, single-use, immovable item is not a kli, or maybe, as you're saying, because doors always are defined by their parents, and therefore, since the parent's not a kli, the door's not a kli. That's a fine point. But either way, Rashi says it's not a kli, and the Rambam says it is a kli. Yeah. Okay. Good. Let's just try and just expand this discussion a bit. And all I really want to do in the last minutes is expand the discussion in the direction of another similar sort of idea, just by way of analogy, and then dip a little bit into Chosronkis and just visit that a little bit. So the analogy I brought, and again, this is not my own analogy. I saw it in the HaKelim, so it's just a way of sort of bringing out this point. Is there's a Shulchan Aruch which I printed. I think I did print in source 2, which is Asovim. So you have growing, I don't know exactly what they are, herbs, growing grass, blades or leaves or shrubbery, and these are attached to the ground, and people used to use them for wiping themselves. Baruch Hashem, we live in modern times, but in the past, people used to use these for wiping themselves, and the halacha is that you're allowed to use them on Shabbos, on condition shelo yazizem. That's what the Shulchan Aruch says. Zizem. as long as you don't move them. So what's the translation? It's halacha that you're not allowed to move them. So there's basically two answers to this question. You're not allowed to move them. The Magen Avraham says because they're Muktza, and the Mishnah Berurah, it's not really the Mishnah Berurah's own idea. He brings it from the Ali Rabbah and other places, not like the Magen Avraham, is just make sure that you don't uproot them. That's what the Shelo Yaziza means. So to put this in different terms, you have grass reeds, whatever they are, grass leaves, herbs that grow, and everyone uses them as towels, as cloths to wipe with. And the Mishnah Berurah says, therefore, they're not Muktza, because they're only made for hishtamshus. And all the Shulchan Aruch means is be careful you don't uproot them, no major chiddush. According to the Magen Avraham, you can use them, but you can't move them because they're Muktza. So what's this machlokas over here, whether they are Muktza or not? So it seems a sort of analogous comparison. The Mishnah Berurah says these are things that have a use. So if they have a use, they're by definition not Muktza. And they, unlike doors, they have a multi-purpose use even, and therefore they're not Muktza. Why should they be Muktza? Or at least if you're using them for their functionality, they're not Muktza. So no one will say that you can't open and close the door because it's Muktza, because the answer is it's maybe not Muchen for anything else because it's Mechuber Karka, but it's definitely Muchen for its use. So these Sovim are attached towels. That's what they are. They're attached towels. It's true that they only have a single purpose use because you can't uproot them on Shabbos, and therefore they're not muchen for any other use, but by definition they're not muktzah with respect to their primary use, and therefore just like you can open and close the door, you can use them for their primary use. And the Magen Avraham says no, the Magen Avraham says they're muktzah. Why are they muktzah? Because more in the direction of Rashi, that if something doesn't have if something is mechuber in its place, then it doesn't have that's not a keli, and therefore it's also to use them also azizam. So it's just a sort of little bit of an analogy for a similar idea. You have something which is has a use and nonetheless is muktzah because its use is only when it's attached. It's an immobile use. That's just by way of analogy for this sort of idea. There's another Magen Avraham which I didn't print, who says that according to the Rambam, who holds that the deles of a house is, even though they're kelim, they're not muchen for tiltil. I didn't print this actually because it's sort of inherent in the sugya itself and in the halachas that we've seen. Let's forget sources for a minute and just step back for a few moments. The house door is a keli, according to the Rambam. It's just not a kli that's only made for other use because it's fixed to the doorway. I don't understand. What happens when it falls off the door? That's what we're talking about. Let's not forget our Mishnah. Right? We've wandered far and wide, but let's get back to basics. The Mishnah says that the doors of boxes are not muktzah even when they fall off, and the door of a house is muktzah when it falls off. Why is it muktzah when it falls off? I mean, it's a kli. So what's the chesaron? Why is it muktzah when it falls off? So the Magen Avraham says on this that if you have a keli, we know there's a concept of if something is muktzah at the beginning of Shabbos remains muktzah or over Shabbos. Ask the Magen Avraham, what happens if you have a keli which is muktzah, and on Shabbos the reason it should be muktzah falls off? Would it still be muktzah through the continuation of Shabbos or not? An example the Magen Avraham gives is Adam's scenario, which is you have a valuable item, a ming vase, and therefore it would never be used for anything else. It's muktzah machmas chesaron. You would never ever use it for anything else. And tragically on Shabbos, it smashes. Okay, now you have a useful shard, which you could do all sorts of things with. The clay shards were useful back in the day. You could do all sorts of things with it. So how would we paskin in this case? You could argue one of two ways. You could say, since it was muktzah at the beginning of Shabbos, it remains muktzah throughout Shabbos. Because it was muktzah at the beginning of Shabbos, or you could argue, why was it muktzah at the beginning of Shabbos? It was a keli, it was a utensil. It just happened to be a utensil that was set aside for one particular use and no other use. But now that it's no longer viable for its particular use, because the main vase can no longer vase away because it's broken, or the Ismail Shamila got cracked and it can no longer be used as an Ismail, or the door fell off the doorpost and it can no longer door away as doors do. So now it's a kli, and therefore it should revert back to the default setting of being mukhan for everything. In other words, a kli is fundamentally a utensil. It's my servant, it's my slave. Kainam are made for any use. There was something holding me back from using it for other things because it was mechuba as a door or because it was a valuable item. But if that holding back, that deterrent is that container that pushes it off from other uses is removed, why should it not become usable on Shabbos? The reason why Mika Diskatzoi ben Hashmashas, Diskatzoi L'Kol is because Shabbos fixes its status. But over here, at the beginning of Shabbos, the status was fixed as a utensil. It just, I wouldn't use it for anything else because its use as an utensil contradicted its usefulness for anything else. But now that stops on Shabbos because the door has fallen off the door or the vase is smashed, why should it be Muktza? It's a keli. So what this is leading us to realize is that despite the Chazon Ish's claim that this whole debate is semantics, it's actually not so clear cut at all. If it's not a keli, it's not a keli. End of discussion. This Lomdisha question we're now asking doesn't start in Rashi. If it at the beginning of Shabbos the door was not a keli, falls off on Shabbos, it's still not a keli, so it doesn't become a keli on Shabbos, and therefore it's mukta. But according to the Rambam, it is a keli. It just was attached to the house, which stopped it being omed for muchan for anything else. Maybe now that it falls off, it can be muchan for other such things. And the Magen Avraham indeed makes your analogy, Adam, and he says this would also be the same with klisha malachtoi la issa. So the Magen Avraham proves from the case of, sorry, you wanted to ask something? The Magen Avraham proves from the case of a dalet that we do indeed say migod iskatzoi ben hashmashas iskatzoi l'kol hayoma. In this case, he says, why would this door? Why does the Mishnah tell us that when the door falls off, it remains muktzah? It's a keli, right? According to the Rambam, it's a keli. Why should the keli be muktzah? The whole reason it was when Shabbos came in, it was not set aside for other uses because it was attached. But now it's detached. You have a perfectly wonderful detached keli, and it was a keli according to the Rambam. Why shouldn't I be allowed to use it? It must be that since it wasn't mukhan for other uses at the beginning of Shabbos, it can't suddenly pop into hachana on Shabbos. That's the essence of halachas and muktzah, and therefore hu hadin. Similarly, says the Magen Avraham, if you have a kli which is muktzah for some other reason, and then it breaks on Shabbos, it would. And now, normally we're used to thinking of kelim that break as becoming less useful for other things. But in this case, it's a kelim that breaks that becomes more useful for other things because sadly and tragically it's lost its value and therefore it can be used for anything. That also would remain muktzah for the rest of Shabbos. So argues the Magen Avraham. In a few moments, I'm going to share different perspectives on this, but this is what the Magen Avraham says. Sorry.
In all those cases described, there's been a change to the item. So either there was four or not.
Yes.
Something has changed or the vase is broken.
Yeah.
What happens if there is no change to the item? It's just speculative change. For example, we have a Muslim kids, but then the value of that item drops so much that now the item is actually worth it.
Right.
So this item is exactly the same as it was when Shabbos came in. Speculative the item is now.
I don't know. That's a very, very interesting thought experiment. I'm not sure. So on Shabbos, breaking news, they've discovered a cache, an archaeological dig with 10 million Ming vases, and the Ming vase market plummets. And right. I don't know. No idea. I'm not going to pass on that one on the spot. No idea. Very interesting question. Yeah. Sorry, Jeffrey.
Why does this scenario not come back to the discussion that we had with the resident losses HaKelim of whether the keli now, whether it had the same use or whether it should break?
You're so right. And Rabbi Kivega indeed asked this in the Magen Avraham. The Magen Avraham seems to be assuming that, so again, just to summarize where we're up to, and then Jeffrey and Rabbi Kivega's critique of this Magen Avraham. So again, the Magen Avraham looks at these dolossus and he says, I don't understand, it falls off. The keli is a keli. The Rambam says that a door is a keli. It wasn't muchan for anything else because it was attached. Or another example, the Ming vase is a keli. It's just not muchan for anything else because it's very valuable. The reason for it being muktzah stops on Shabbos. Would it now stop being muktzah because the vase is smashed? Or maybe a new example, the bottom's fallen out of the Ming vase market, the Ming vase index has crashed, and it stops being chesaron case. So why should it be muktzah? Similarly, the door has fallen off the doorway. Therefore, and in fact, his raya, his evidence for this is the door's fallen off the doorway. It's no longer made to be a door, and therefore it goes back to its natural state as a keli of being a multi-purpose appliance. That's the Magen Avraham. His answer is Rabbi Kiva says, I don't know what you're talking about. Rabbi Kiva says that's back to basics. Remember, there was a machlokas why the door that fell off the keli isn't Muktza. And a significant answer to that question was because it's only to be reattached. In other words, it's not Shivrei Kelim. Shivrei Kelim has ceased to be the old appliance. Here it still is only to be the original appliance because I'm planning to reattach it. If I'm planning to reattach it, that's not that it still has its old functionality. So this door has not become a multi-purpose appliance because it's still a door, and the plan is still to reattach it. This is Rabbi Kiva's critique of the Magen Avraham. This is one type of critique that you can make of the Magen Avraham. There's a second critique that you can make in the Magen Avraham, which is as follows: with the door, it never became, even according to the Rambam, it never became enough of a kli to be mukhan for everything. And therefore, it doesn't suddenly get new hachana, can't pop into existence on Shabbos. It wasn't a full kli. The Rambam says it was a kli, but it's not mukhan. Translation, it's a kli, but a kli that's not only for all hishtamshiyos, only made for one purpose. It's a single purpose kli. If it now breaks off the door on Shabbos, how can it suddenly become a multi-purpose kli? How can that new hachana click in? However, with Muktza machmas and kiss, it is a full kli. It's just a kli that I've set aside not to use for other things. Shabbos, it breaks on Shabbos, or the market falls out of the bottom falls out of the market. I no longer wish it to be set aside to be excluded from other functionality. Therefore, the other functionality will now be available on Shabbos. So just to summarize, so we're not completely hopelessly confused over here. We started off by looking at a difference in language between Rashi and the Rambam. Rashi says it's not a kli. Rambam says it is a kli, but it's not mukhan. Point number one: is there any nafkamina between this, and why are they taking their stances? Well, the Rambam is saying a chiddush that it's a kli, but it's not mukhan. Why is it not mukhan? Because it's a single-purpose kli. It's not only made for all other ishkamshiyos. Okay, is there enough nafkamina in this? The Magen Avraham argues that this Rambam is teaching us a chiddush that's a kli which for some reason or other, like Chesar and Kiss, was held to be a single-purpose kli. If on Shabbos that reason disappears, nonetheless remains Muktza, because we say Mikadis Katzai in such a scenario. And that's how his analogy between this case and all others. Rabbi Kiva unpicks the point in one way, and Rabbi Kiva says it's not because it's Katzoi over here. The reason is because it still remains a door of a house. The plan is to reattach it. It's not Shivrei Kelim, as Tosfos pointed out right at the beginning of the Masechet when he said, right at the beginning of the Perek, when he said that Shivrei Kelim is not analogous to doors. The second way we can unpick this is that the whole comparison between this and the Kli, that's Muktza machmas Kiss, is not a correct comparison. Here, it was never made into a kli that's only made for all hishtamshiyos. It's a kli that was a single-purpose kli. Our minvaz isn't fundamentally a single-purpose kli. It's fundamentally a regular kli. It's a full kli. It's just I set it aside to be only used for one purpose, and one shouldn't make the two comparisons. And with that, we'll conclude our summary of the Machlokas Rashi and the Rambam. And we're going to move on to the next sugya. But I would suggest humbly that people use the next of Sunday morning learning as a chance to do an overview chazorah on everything we've learned. I can't stress enough that one of the challenges of learning Be'iyun is you can lose sight of the woods from the trees. And I really would urge everyone to go back to the Mishnah, to just reread the Mishnah and the basic Gemara, and just in your mind try and get a summary of the different views. So go back to the basic questions, which is, why does a delet that falls off a kli not be Muktza? And remember, we saw lots of answers to that question. Either because it's only to be reattached or because it still has usefulness to it, and so on and so forth. Why is this different to Shivrei Kelim, which is Tosfos, and then why is the delis of a house attached? So I would really urge everyone to use Sunday as a chazorah chance. I'm not going to give shiur on Sunday. I'll give out more Maram Komas so that people can go forward, but my preference actually would be to humbly suggest to everyone to use Sunday as a review, because we've got so caught up in nitty-gritty, I don't want people to lose the sort of sweeping vision. And then more sensible, I would say, is Tuesday for us to move on to the next sugya, but that's where we'll get up to, and I wish everyone a good evening. Today's live and online.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
But can I just ask,